Welcome to another episode. Today I'd like to talk about how to develop a healthy relationship with money. And concretely, we'd like to share two things. The first one is how to get a sense of how much to charge for something if you're the person who can set a price, or decide if something somebody is suggesting to you actually is a good price or not. And then secondly, we wanted to share with you the best money advice we've ever heard. So stay tuned for that. But first, let's look into the whole price issue.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of like the Goldilocks thing where, too much is, if you're charging too much or being asked to pay too much, it can feel uncomfortable. And I think a lot of us are familiar with that where it's like, yeah, that's just too much. But maybe you can also think of an example of when something's been too little. Like if someone's offering to help you with something, or maybe you know them a bit, or and it's just such a small amount that just like, oh, how's that working for them? And there can almost be a discomfort on the too little side too. And somewhere there's a window where, okay, this can kind of work and feel resonant.
Yeah, and I wanted to give a practical example for how that can look like. So often, for instance, in negotiations, it can be really challenging to figure out, well, what should I ask for, or what should I accept? And I think this model, it's called Resonant pricing, and I first heard it from Mark Silver from Heart of Business. First and only, actually, he's a person who created it, and I've never heard it from somebody else. It can be really helpful. And that's basically about getting clear what feels like too little, what feels like too much. And it doesn't matter which one of these benefits you. Like rationally, let's say I'm asking somebody to pay me something. Why should I get clear on what's too much? Well, the thing is, if I ask for something that's too much, I might lose the client, or maybe they hire me, but then they have like huge expectations that are beyond the normal scope of what I do, just because I'm charging more than what feels resonant. Or it damages a relationship, which then leads them to not hire me in the future, and so on and so forth. And you're just going to feel really uncomfortable if you are asking for a price that's just completely outside of the range. So it's not saying you never should ask for something that's a stretch. A stretch is different from something that's just completely unreasonable. So, for instance, when I coach clients about how to negotiate a promotion, we look at, well, what's too little, so that they're clear on, no, I don't want, that doesn't feel good for me. I need to ask for more, I need to negotiate for more. But also on, well, what's maybe too high, so that they can actually negotiate with the other person from a perspective of respect. And conversely, I was just hiring somebody to do something for me, and it wasn't, because it wasn't really clear, what price I should ask. And they actually asked me what my budget was, and I'm like, what do I know? And then we went through this exercise, and I got clear on what's too little, because I don't want to, suggest something that where it's almost like an insult to the other person, or like I'm wondering the whole time, well, how does it work for them, or feeling like I'm exploiting them. Mm-hmm. And this is really helpful, I think, this whole concept in any type of negotiation. And it's also helpful in just deciding, well, if I get a meal at this restaurant, does that feel resonant, or is it too much? Or, and over time, if you just tune into, well, how does that price feel? And you'll notice that some prices feel really right on, it just feels like, yeah, that feels good. That's a good price. And some, maybe feels like it's too much, or others feel like, yeah, that's too little, that just doesn't feel right. And interestingly enough, you can do that even if you have no sense of how the currency works. Like I've done some exercises where we looked at what would be the resonant pricing, and we did it in a currency that only one person on the whole call knew. And we still got about the same number, all of us, which I think is super fascinating.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so that's sort of like the first point. The first point is to kind of like become more aware of what's resonant and what's not resonant. And that can really help you gain some competence around this whole issue of price and money and so on and so forth. And now on to the second advice, which
Can I
is...
give an example?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, sometimes you have these pay from the heart things, where, like, for the heart of business thing that Bears mentioned.
Pay what you can.
Or
is
pay
more
what
typical.
you can, yeah. Where I think the amount we initially gave for a program, was, it sounded reasonable at the time. It was toward the lower end, but then we had such amazing value from it. We're like, oh, yeah, maybe we should, send some more. And I think at that point we didn't, but we signed up for another program that was maybe a bit more than we were expecting to be paying for that. So there's this way of, it feels good when things are in harmony.
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is like right relationship, like right relationship to money, right relationship to the people you work with, and so on and so forth. And we don't often talk about that because it's sort of like this whole capitalist mindset that more is always better, without looking at all the things that you may be losing if you're just looking at it from a purely win-lose kind of bottom line perspective. So I think this is one where you can actually experience much more real abundance because you're in right relationship. Now finally on to the best money advice. And that advice comes from a book that you actually introduced me to.
Okay.
So the book is called Your Money or Your Life by, I think, Vicki Robin. And I think you shared that it started the environmental movement. Or no?
No, it was tied in with the environmental movement.
Okay.
It started the financial independence, retire early. It was kind of a touch. It was one of the things that they built off, and she was very environmentally focused, where it's basically using less resources and living more sustainably, and some of those things.
Right. Exactly. So now on to the best advice, and that advice is stop trying to impress other people. Isn't that awesome? I mean, if everybody lived by that principle, we would live in a world that would be so radically different. Like we couldn't even probably recognize it. It's like it would be like living on another planet. I mean, I think like entire industries would probably like vanish, and not the industries that we necessarily need, right? And I think there's this saying about like how people spend money they don't have. No, people buy things they don't want to impress people they don't like with money they don't have. And, that's basically how a lot of the world works. So, yeah, I mean,
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
And if often people don't even notice, or if they do notice, they feel envious and resentful that you have more than them. So it's kind of like this totally toxic brew.
Yeah, right. And I think that's why really applying that advice. And honestly, I mean, it's not only good advice with your money, it's good advice in every area of our lives, right? If I never tried to impress somebody, I think my life would be a lot happier than it already is. Like, I really like my life. I have a really good life. And I think it would get a lot better if I completely stopped, wanting to impress anybody. That's probably not realistic, but just sort of like keeping that in mind and just seeing like, am I trying to impress somebody here? And particularly, am I trying to impress people that I don't actually care about anyway? Like, of course I want to have my loved ones to have a positive impression of me. But that's probably generally more stuff like, oh, am I a good person? Am I... whatever that means. I mean, it's like a whole other discussion. What does that even mean? So, yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay, yeah, so to summarize that. So the first thing we covered is to kind of look into how prices have a resonance and how that resonance can be right on or it can be too high or too low, and just figuring out where something falls, something that you are asking of somebody or something that they suggest to you, and how this tool can be super helpful in negotiations and in all situations where you're not really clear what the parameters are and how to come up with a good price to use that model. And secondly, we shared the best money advice we've ever heard, or I've ever heard. And that's stop trying to impress other people. And that by itself, really applying that is probably going to lead to a lot of reduction in expenses. So yeah, if you like this video and would like to see more, please hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video. Or I'll see you. Maybe he'll be there too. Okay, bye now. Did you enjoy this video? If so, let's stay in contact. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also sign up for my email list at leaderforgood.com, and you'll not only receive a free Leader for Good meditation, but I'll also keep you in the loop about what I'm cooking up these days. I look forward to seeing you on the other side.